Welcome to Love and Lattes, the podcast designed for women who are ready to stop settling and start living a life full of authentic love, confidence, and real connection. I'm your host, Victoria, the self-love scientist, speaker, and coach, and I'm here to help you reclaim your power, deepen your relationships, and fall unapologetically in love with yourself. So grab your tea, your latte, or your favorite beverage, and let's get started.
What happens when you're forced to co-parent with someone toxic, or even two people at once? How do you raise emotionally healthy children when your life feels like a courtroom drama and not a love story? And what does it look like to choose peace and authenticity when chaos seems court-ordered? Well, my loves, we've got you, because on today's episode of Love and Lattes, I am joined by Marisol Vasquez. Marisol is a high-conflict co-parenting coach, a speaker, and a resilience advocate who has lived through it all: custody battles, toxic dynamics, and the emotional toll of raising kids in the fire. And she is here today to share her alchemy, her strength, and her resilience. Welcome, Marisol. I'm so glad for you to be here.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here too.
Amazing. So for everyone new who's tuning in and they're like, I've never heard this, term before, how would you describe high conflict co-parenting?
The simplest way that I can describe it is when, of course, two people have a child and they are either getting separated or divorced, and they have a hard time agreeing on anything. And in the process of that, different mechanisms come into play that make that disagreement really toxic. For example, omitting information, manipulation. Sometimes it does involve the usage of the abuse of the legal system, or even the use of kids as pawns in a battle with the other parent. Just basically making it a lot more difficult than it is to parent, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know in our previous conversation before we pressed record and when we had our first interview, you shared a little bit of your story. Would you be open to sharing some of that?
Yeah. So my journey started way back when I was 22, and I now in the present have two kids with two different fathers. My journey has been one of a lot of unrelenting dynamics of me trying to figure out how to basically go through all of the pieces of what it entails to have two kids with two different fathers. I at some point managed two different court cases, two custody cases, and two child support cases. My longest custody battle was for my daughter, and that lasted about 10 years. So it was incredibly difficult. I spent most of my 20s and my 30s doing this. So it took up a lot of energy, time, my youth, my effort, and money.
Yeah. That is quite the time to be putting into this.
Yes. So, essentially, even if you kind of extract out the piece of the high conflict co-parenting, I was so young when I started doing this, parenting. I was so young that I kind of feel like I grew up with my kids. I grew up with my kids, and just that piece alone is hard enough when you're mothering without a map, because I don't have a good role model as a mother or even as a father. So when you have that piece just by itself, it's already difficult enough. And then you add the dynamic of the high conflict situations that I ended up having with both of my kids' dads. It just makes it almost impossible to figure out how to parent, on the with daily life. You can go through all the court hearings with your co-parent, if and I'm using that word loosely, because when you're co-parenting, there should be some level of like respect and amicable relationship, you know what I mean, like in the after fact, just to raise the kids. With a high conflict co-parent environment, that person's not really a co-parent. He's more like the person's more like someone that's just trying to cause more chaos, So you add that to the mix, And if you're going to court hearings, it just makes it really complicated to find joy sometimes, and essentially it does kind of hijack portions of your motherhood.
Yeah. That's, I can hear it in your voice, and I really much appreciate you sharing this with me. Where did you find your own strength and your own courage to like really power through so you could have the life you have right now?
I think I grew up in a very toxic dynamic too, and I think a lot of it stems from that, and I have noticed that I'm more resilient that I give myself credit for, which is kind of strange to even say that because I'm aware of it. I'm aware of it, but but I just kind of think it's like ordinary thing, A lot of my strength came from singing. I love to sing. I've been singing since I was little, and I'm also creative in other ways. I write, I sing, like I just mentioned. So I derived a lot of it from that. And then eventually when it got really hard, I chose a faith, So I'm not very religious, but it became so difficult to be in these scenarios that I had to choose something that helped me feel supported, especially when my kids weren't with me, and they were off with the other parents. It's hard. It's hard to let go, and it's hard to figure out who you are as you're going through these really bad, really, really difficult dynamics. So I chose a faith at that time to help me through it.
Beautiful. And did having these, creative outputs, finding faith, those helped you identify more of like who you are and what you wanted to be as a mother and as a person?
Yes, because my kids actually love singing. Both of them love to sing. We've been singing in the car since they were babies because that's a habit that I have that we kind of just developed. It wasn't even intentional. We just throw on music, and now my kids, I don't know. I think my son likes Jennifer Lopez more than my daughter does, but they all know all the Jennifer Lopez songs. They probably know all the Jessica Simpson songs, And then when I chose a faith, we got into the Christian music that some of us still love it, So that became the thing, you know what I mean? Like music was something that we all were able to bond over even when things were really tough, And I think another thing too that really helped me was I was constantly being accused of something, and it was going into the court hearings of these false accusations. So I have struggled with anger for a long time. So I went and I enlisted myself voluntarily into an anger management class to help myself through it when I was being targeted. And when my daughter was saying things about me that weren't true, and even now too, like my son will say things about me that are not true either. And dad has the dads will have like different narratives of like what occurred, because it's always different when they say it. It always kind of spins it in a way where like they did nothing wrong, and it kind of shifts blame, right? So when I when I was in the custody battle for my daughter, I actually went to a free local anger management class that helped me kind of calm a little bit more down. I'm still a little spicy sometimes, but I I calmed down a lot.
Yeah, no, like you were going through this like long-term,
Yeah.
like this chaotic experience. So I don't blame you for putting yourself in there. In fact, I think I have a lot of like respect for you entering into those classes. So you really are doing your best to show up, especially for your kids.
Yeah, and the environment in that class was weird because actually all the parents there were court ordered to be there.
And you're like, dummy.
And I wasn't.
I
So
volunteered.
when they all found out why I was there voluntarily, they all looked at me like I was crazy. But everyone in that class was court ordered by an agency, from where I live, to be there for whatever reason. I never found out. I never went into their spaces trying to find their business, but I knew what I wanted to do and what I was doing there. So it was helpful. It was very helpful.
And so with these experiences, then you started creating your own process to be
Mhm.
a high conflict co-parenting coach. What does that look like?
Well, one of the things that when I was still in the middle of the custody battle, I knew that at some point I wanted to come back and help women who are going through it. So now that my daughter is older, we have no custody hearings. We don't have a court order anymore. She is now 21. So I have more of that breathing room to be able to come back and help women who are stuck in the trenches of battling a toxic co-parent in court. So my coaching sessions are basically based on me helping them strategize on how to safeguard their relationships with their kids in the chaos of a custody battle and dealing with all of the things that you go through that I don't think the courts really can be really tone deaf of what a mom goes through when you're battling an ex in court for your kids, and you're still having to hold a job, trying to make friends, trying to date, and trying to be a parent, and showing up to these events that are shared events, and your ex was showing up, and now he might have somebody new too. So it's like all these things, it's a lot to deal with. So I've been through it twice. I've been through it twice. So I know I have firsthand knowledge on what it's like to go through the process of figuring out your way as you're trying to as you're parenting your kids, because if we as parents feel confused, we moms feel confused while this is happening, the kids are going to feel even more confused. Yeah. So you're more like a sounding board for them. You're that safe space. You figure out how to be that safe space for your kids in your home, even if that doesn't exist at dad's home.
I think that's a beautiful way of saying it. And again, everything that you've experienced, like even outside of the court, even outside of the custody, like you said, like trying to, in quotes, like be a human. I'm just trying to like get
Right.
earlier before we press record. I was like, how you doing? I was like, I'm just trying to be a human
I'm
today.
just trying to human. Yeah, I'm just trying to human. Like, yeah. And mind you that when I was going through that, I myself had to grow up. And even as my kids got older, I had to grow up with them, because I also have some, parents, we're not perfect, but it shouldn't end with just stating we're not perfect. We still have to kind of get in there and get into the mess of it to unpack on what we have done to that affects our kids. So when I was able to focus more on my parenting, on how my parenting affects my children, my exes became irrelevant because that's between me and my kids now. You know what I mean? Like whatever beef my exes have with the kids that they haven't unpacked, that's not mine. That's not mine at all. So I focused on my stuff, and just focusing on my stuff, it was liberating but terrifying, because no parent wants to be in that space of having to humble yourself to realize that, yeah, you've done all these things differently than your own parents, but there's still things about your own parenting that has affected your children. It's hard.
And thank you again for being so vulnerable and honestly, probably sharing a lot more truths than we realize. I never
Yeah,
really
it's
looked at the dynamics of my own relationship with my parents, and then I saw how that was like
yeah.
kind of feeding into my other relationships, and I was like, oh.
Can you repeat that? Because you froze for a little.
Oh no, I did. Oh, damn. Okay. I would say, one, I really, really appreciate you being so vulnerable and sharing these truths. Like, one, it is so hard and it's difficult. Like, it's not all that Instagram and TikTok show it to
It's
be. Like,
not.
there's some real hard shit happening behind the scene. And I think if we all, like you said, you do kind of take into consideration this relationship, and how, like you said it really well, like how can I change this? How can I stop this? And I think
Yeah.
that, I don't have kids, and at the same time, it's when you realize the relationships you have with others, how they can be
Mhm.
very closely like a reflection of the relationship you have with your parents or like any kind of guardian at a young age. It's like, oh, I need to be the one who changes this. And that's
Yeah,
really hard.
it is so hard. It's taking me a lot of therapy to realize what I've realized now. You know, I've gone through therapy. I still have things that I'm working through even now, even years later. The last time I was in court, I think it was in 2015,
Mhm.
and I'm still combing through it. I'm still combing through it in therapy. It's still left an effect even after the fact, even though my daughter's now older, it's still left lingering effects. It doesn't just go away, like something like that, something so life changing for a prolonged period of time, it's not gonna just disappear. And that's kind of what I ended up coming into the know of, and grieving it. A lot of things that have to do with dealing with toxic people, whether it be, through parenting or in a relationship, a big piece of the puzzle that typically people just kind of just wash on by and they just think they're moving forward is the grief part. It I give myself space to grieve the things that I've lost, the things that I thought of how life would be, um, the relationships I thought I would have that have morphed into something else that I'm still learning to navigate. There's a lot of grief surrounding relationships, especially in toxic dynamics, because the further you are apart from it, once you start kind of getting into the deeper parts of it, you start realizing how fucked up it really was. Just to put it simply, and in a raw statement, you'll start realizing how fucked up it was, and that deserves its own space.
I agree.
Yeah.
Everyone listening, I hope you like really take into what Mariel said, because honestly, um, not just, this is something, grief is such a beautiful, big process of things that
Mhm.
happen to us, and allowing us that space is part of the healing journey.
Yeah.
And then from that grief, it's also like the forgiveness part too. Like, even though like we're mourning the life's like, it was supposed to be this way, it was supposed to be that way,
Right.
and now I'm having to make this new dynamic, and you lost
Mhm.
time, that's something we don't get back. So
Right.
we have to be easy and loving on ourselves to know that, yes, all this time has been like just in courtrooms, and now I have this
Right.
now, right?
And, I think forgiveness, the word gets thrown around a lot, and I feel like in some ways it gets a little bit, I would say, weaponized against people who have survived trauma, with as if we're forced into forgiveness, and if you don't do it, then something's wrong with you because you're not being the bigger person. I really feel like, from my journey, I don't really think you need to forgive anyone unless you're ready for it and that's what you want to do. But I have found that it's not really a requirement for healing through complex trauma. I think it just depends on how you want to do your journey. For me, I think the only person that I really wanted to gain forgiveness from was from myself, and having more grace for myself, um, for not knowing the things that I know now that I didn't know then. You know what I mean? Because you can only operate within the context of the information that you have at that time. And for me, it became really a lot of, it came a lot, I'm sorry, it became very important for me to kind of sort through that, because I have two of them. I have two kids with two different dads, and most of my relationships with men have been very toxic. And I noticed about 3 years ago that I had a pattern going on, that there was a pattern. The only thing that kept changing was the face. And they actually mirrored the relationship that I had with my mom, who's now been she died in 2020. So when I saw that, I started really seeing what was going on with how I was, the type of relationships I was choosing to be part of. But then you're only choosing within the context of what you know at that time. And now the people that I've been with, with the healing that I've done now, I wouldn't be with them. Like, I would not be with them, So it changes, and then one day you'll actually look at it and you're like, oh my goodness, I don't even know what I saw in you, like that type of reaction, because now you're kind of morphing into something else and a different version of yourself, but it takes time and it's not perfect. I have moments where I still see myself like backpedaling and like, like I'll think about doing something that maybe is not a good idea, but now I'm older and I kind of feel like, well, that probably would have been better 10 years ago, but that's not going to work for me now. Cause now I'm like, I'm all about like what's worth my time. And
Yes. Wow.
sometimes what's out there is not worth my time, and I really kind of try to see what's a good use of my time, what's a good use of my space, my heart, my my soul, and I noticed with the men that I was in relationships with, they're not picky with who they go with. They just stay with people who tolerate their bullshit. And that's when I was like, oh, so I'm not like, this one of a kind chick that you just, that you wanted to be with. You'll just choose anybody that'll be okay with your crap. So that's what I noticed when you're out there trying to find, for me, I've been single now for 3 years. And when I've been trying to date, I noticed that we're like, if you talk, like a man will tell you what his agenda is, and it's up to you whether or not you want to tolerate that. And now there's things that I know that are deal breakers. I didn't used to have deal breakers, and that was a problem that I got me into some messes. I didn't have deal breakers.
I think that's amazing. That's such a big transformation even there. You said it well. You're like, wait a minute. No, I've got some, I have some deal breakers. And I think one of the things we struggle with is really like that willingness to accept, like, you're in this new version of yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And every time you like heal more and learn more, you're like, wait a minute, this is something that maybe the person I was 10 years ago was
Right.
fine with. Like, I personally have been there. I'm like, wait a minute, am I settling? I
Right.
don't know.
Yeah. I went on a date last November, and he told me he was single. Long story short, it turns out he wasn't. People have different definitions of being single nowadays that I was not aware of, because for me, single means you're single. You're not living with your ex-spouse or your current spouse. You're not, you don't have side pieces. You don't have, exes lingering around you. I am truly single. And for him, single meant something else that I was not aware of. He was still living with his wife and he was about to divorce her, and they were living in the same home. Now, don't get me wrong. I can understand because of the current economic situation where like people need to stay, at least financially tied until they officially separate, right? Well, here's the thing. I don't want to be part of that. So y'all can have all kinds of arrangements because of the crappy inflation going on. Don't include me in it. So he tried to convince me that he was gonna divorce her and that we can be together. And he did this whole thing. And I remember sitting there as he's like trying to deliver his agenda to me. And I'm thinking, and I actually told him, I think 10 years ago I would have been okay with this crap, but I'm not okay with it anymore. And he just looked at me puzzled, like, what do you mean? He has no clue of my history. You know what I mean? He doesn't need to know
Yeah.
all of my shit, but like, but the way he looked, he was like, what do you mean? I'm like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I can't do what you're offering, and he kept trying to like, well, what if I do this? And what if I do that? And I told him no. And I ended up blocking him after that. That was literally the last date I've had. And I felt really proud of myself, because there was like a shift, and those shifts, you know, there's so much to gain for us as like humans when you have small shifts that no one knows about, but that that you're like shifting. Where
Yeah.
like where you're like oh shit, like I can't do that anymore. Like I'm not, yeah, maybe at one point I was that person putting up with crap. I'm not that person anymore. And that's okay. Like this is what it is. What's interesting is that it's hard to be a new version of yourself. It's hard, there's nothing easy about it. So I stuck with it. And then I happened to run into him last month at the grocery store, and I just pretend like I don't know him. I'm like, I don't know you.
I think that's such a big moment, though. And I do believe we ourselves as individuals have so many shifts in our, like, just
Yes.
small shifts. The big ones, like even the courage to stand up and be like, no, this isn't who I am anymore. And I think a lot of folks, myself included, I came to this realization last year, which is wild because this whole separation, like my own divorce happened, what year is it? 2025. So it happened in 2022. And it's like there are people out here who are still holding on to this version of who I
Yeah.
was then. And I'm like, I have lived like 60 lifestyles after
Right.
that. You're gonna have to you either have to catch up with me or you don't. Either way, I'm going to keep moving forward. But I say that and it sounds so easy. It's hard.
It's hard.
Like
It's hard.
I wish you could see me in this lens, but I went through my own journey. You got to go through yours.
It's hard, and when as we talked about, how we do evolve, that is I would say the key, and that's the idea I think behind being a human. But the thing is that not everyone does that. Okay. So like when just to tie it back into the high conflict co-parenting thing, when you're dealing with toxic individuals, they're not gonna do the evolution that we just talked about. They're not gonna be able to see how what they do affects other people around them, including their children. And when I realized that, that was the single best strategy that I used to capitalize on safeguarding my relationship with my kids. Because even though it's been painful for me to basically get my shit together, let's just call it what it is. To basically get my shit together, it was painful for me. I knew it was going to be a benefit to my children and then a benefit to me as a person in the long run. Now, I don't know how it was going to turn out. I just figured that I was going to be able to do things that they couldn't do. And that's why I ended up doing them, because it helped. Not only did it help me, it helped develop my relationship with my kid better, both of my kids. And also, they also have a little, I feel weird calling myself this, but my kids consider me a role model, and because of that, that to me is worth it. It was worth the evolution, because my kids, like, I've they pull me in for life shit. You know what I mean? When life really hits and things are quite confusing, I get pulled in for life stuff. They're not pulling in their dads; they're pulling me. And even if we're not in a perfect situation and we're bickering, because humans, these are relationships. They're not perfect. Like we all have our thing. And we all bicker. Sometimes we don't agree, we disagree or whatever. But one of the things that I did, that I really honed down on, was me having to heal so that I can evolve, so that way my kids can also benefit. And then in turn, I benefited from it too. But healing is not, that saying how healing is not linear. I think it's not even just linear. It's messy as shit. Like, like it is so darn messy, and sometimes it's utterly exhausting. Like, being a human is exhausting, So that's kind of what I ended up using to help myself and help my kids.
Amazing. This has been such a great conversation, Marisol, and I truly, truly appreciate you. Is there anything you would love to share with our listeners, especially those who might be or know someone who's in a very high conflict co-parenting situation? Is there anything you'd like to leave with them before we close out?
Yeah, one of the things that I see some parents, who are involved in high conflict co-parenting, one of the things I see them sometimes do is that they shy away from showing up for their kids because the ex is right there with the new spouse, and they're parading their new life, and they might have left you for them. Believe me, I know, because I used to be me. So keep showing up. Keep showing up. If it's uncomfortable when you're showing up, be there, because your kid will remember when you showed up, and they will never forget that you showed up. Even if all these dynamics are all effed up and you got all this background stuff happening, and now you're at the school event trying to enjoy the school event and you can't because you got court hearing the next day, keep showing up. If you need to like cut it down to maybe 45-minute appearance, you do that too. If you need to scream after you leave, scream in your car safely away from the school, because you don't know where the hell they're at. So believe me, I've done this life, so like keep showing up. Keep showing up when it's hard.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Marisol, and also like the real realities and vulnerabilities of being in this situation, and the fact that you've turned this, like this really big experience into coaching for other parents. So thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
And everyone else, thank you so much for listening to this amazing episode, and we'll see you next time.